If we could ask you all, please, to come to order. Thank you very much. Our guest tonight is the Secretary of the Treasury, Henry Paulson. Known to his friends as Hank Paulson, he brings to the job over 30 years of experience in investment banking. Hank was telling me earlier that it took him 9 months to convince everyone in Washington at the White House and at Treasury to not call him Mr. Secretary, but to call him Hank. It took me 9 months to have him call me Mr. Secretary. So he is the former chairman and CEO of Goldman Sachs, and like his three immediate predecessors, John Corzine, Stephen Friedman, and Bob Rubin, he has followed them all into government, answering the call to service of his country. Technically speaking, his job is to oversee financial and monetary matters for the president, including tax policy and printing currency. In fact, the Treasury Secretary's job has broadened over the years to become an all-around guardian of our economic security. In his first major speech, before being sworn in as Treasury Secretary in July of 2006, he told students at Columbia Business School that the country faced 4 major challenges: reforming entitlement programs, including Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security; energy security, and specifically our overconsumption of fossil fuels and our overdependence on foreign oil; 3, trade policies and the impact of open markets on American workers; and finally, the growing income gap between those at the top of the economic ladder and those at the bottom. In that same speech, Hank Paulson underscored the importance of bipartisanship in finding solutions to these enormous economic challenges. His choice of those 4 issues reflects that bipartisan view, and more than a few conservative eyebrows were raised by his unusually candid remarks on the income gap, global warming, and also on free trade. Today, these economic challenges remain at the center of our national debate and discussion, and are major issues in the current presidential campaign. At the same time, the subprime mortgage crisis and the slowing economy has presented a more immediate challenge to this administration and to our nation. They are also a major test of Hank Paulson's formidable political skills, which, in the interest of full disclosure, were first honed during a brief stint in the Pentagon and the White House during the Nixon administration. To his credit, Secretary Paulson moved quickly to build support on Capitol Hill for the president's economic stimulus package, and I would note that the tone and substance of the debate have been remarkably free of partisan acrimony. Hank Paulson is also a product of Illinois, having grown up in Barrington Hills, where he still keeps a home. He and his wife, Wendy, have 2 adult children, and they recently became grandparents. So it's obviously fair to say that he also has a deep personal incentive to fix the Social Security system. Please welcome to the Economic Club of Chicago, Secretary Hank Paulson.
Bill, thank you very much. I'm a big admirer of Bill Daley, and this is the second time I've seen him this week. He was in Washington on Tuesday with a bipartisan group of former cabinet leaders advocating for trade and trade with Colombia, the free trade agreement, which is an act of political courage in today's environment, and I would say one that's also very necessary when you look at how important exports are to our economic growth today. They accounted for about 40% of our growth over the last year. It's great to be home. I love this city, and it's particularly fun for me to look out and see so many friends, former clients, former competitors, and of course now as Treasury Secretary, you're all my clients. And I was speaking of clients as I was flying in this afternoon. I thought back of a time in the early 80s when one of my clients at the time was the target of a unsolicited offer so-called hostile takeover attempt. And I was up late at night with the chief executive officer, and as we were going through all kinds of strategies, he looked up at me and said, "Gee, this would really be interesting if it weren't happening to me." And you know, at first I thought he was making a joke, and then I realized he was deadly serious, and it made quite an impression on me. And today, as I was flying in, I thought of that, and it had a certain applicability to my situation. When I look at the things on my plate, you know, seriously, the U.S. economy is structurally sound and has got strong long-term economic fundamentals, but we've got quite a headwind when you look at what's going on with housing and the capital markets turmoil and oil at $100 a barrel. And while I expect the economy to continue to grow this year, the housing correction clearly is a big drag, and it poses by far the biggest risk to the downside. And we at Treasury are really focused on what's going on at housing today in the U.S. You all may have noticed some of the economic data that's come out this week. And again, that data on housing tends to support those forecasters who believe that this correction will take some time to play out, and I agree with them. Housing starts fell to a 17-year low in January and are down over 50% from the peak in January of 2006. Existing home sales are at a 9-year low at the end of January, and at the end of January, we see the inventory of unsold homes is now over 10 months, and during more normal times, you would expect that inventory. I hope that's not mine. I don't think it is. It was. I tell you, the president has a real problem when cell phones go off, and particularly when they go off in the Oval Office. And I had just a terrible experience in one. We were there with a head of state, and I was sitting on a couch next to Condi Rice, and suddenly my cell phone went off, and I usually don't carry one. I couldn't find it. I was looking at every pocket. I stood up. I looked under under one of the cushions. Finally, Condi patted here, and I immediately turned it off, and he made some gracious comment. And later he told me that was a 3-bagger, in the Oval Office with a head of state, and I couldn't find it. But anyway. Fortunately, that wasn't my cell phone tonight. But anyway, but back to the housing data, and you've probably also seen the numbers. We saw the Case-Shiller index for the 20 largest metropolitan areas in the U.S., and that was down again 9% over the last year. So this. Really, I guess as we look back, it shouldn't be a surprise that when you look at the number of years we had where we had unsustainable appreciation in the housing market, and something like this is inevitable, and it's necessary. And of course, we don't, as you in Chicago know, it's not a national housing market. And when you look at the statistics in Bakersville, California, from 2002 through 2006, home prices were up 122%. In Miami, Florida, up 107%. In Las Vegas, 97%. And if you look at those 3 states in Arizona, they really, really skew the data. And if we didn't have those states as part of the discussion, and of course they've got to be, they're a very important part of the country and very important economies. But if they weren't part of the discussion, we'd be talking about something which seemed like a more normal and a more modest housing correction, if there is such a thing. And then, of course, there are other parts of the country where there are also high levels of foreclosures, where there are different set of economic issues that are driving them, and they're regional economic issues where the economies are struggling a bit, if you look at Cleveland, Ohio, or Flint, Michigan. But let's put all of this in perspective, and I remind people of this. 93% of the mortgages in this country are being paid on time, and there's 55 million people who have mortgages. 93% are being paid on time every month, and less than 2% are in foreclosure. So while some in Washington are proposing big interventions, most of the proposals I've seen would do more harm than good, and I'm not interested in bailing out investors, lenders, and speculators. I'm very focused on solutions targeted at struggling homeowners who want to keep their homes. And when you look at this, has to be a shared responsibility. Government has got its role, and we've worked hard. The president has signed legislation that provides tax relief to homeowners who have their mortgage reduced in value when they do a workout. We're working hard to get some more flexibility for the FHA so that they can help out an additional 300,000 subprime borrowers. We have various proposals for tax-exempt financing, which will be helpful at the state and local area. And then a big part of what we've tried to do is work with industry. And we have this Hope Now Alliance, which has servicers covering 90% of the subprime market and 70% of the overall mortgage market. And one of the very big jobs there is to get to people who are delinquent in their mortgage and have them come forward and talk to someone and seek help to get to subprime mortgage holders 90 days before they're going to have their mortgage reset, and have them come forward and ask for help. And it's really quite depressing to recognize that 50% of those who lose their homes in foreclosures never talk to anyone. And we've worked very hard on this, but again, this is a shared responsibility. If borrowers aren't willing to ask for help or respond to efforts to reach them, there's only so much others can do on their behalf. The other thing that we've all read about are mortgages that are underwater. And you may have seen some statistics in a Moody's put out a report where they said there are 8.8 million homeowners where the value of the mortgage was higher than the value of their house. And that really, I can't confirm that, but that isn't not surprising when you recognize that many people who either refinanced or bought a home over the last several years is apt to be in that situation. But as far as I'm concerned, being underwater when you can afford your mortgage does not affect your ability to pay your mortgage. And homeowners who can afford their mortgage should honor their obligations, and most of them do just that. And homeowners who can't afford their payments are the borrowers we're working to help. And we're trying to reach them with affordable solutions. And homeowners who gambled in the housing market and viewed the purchase of a home as a short-term investment may choose to walk away. And those who do this, as far as I'm concerned, are nothing more than speculators. And again, they're not the focus of our efforts. Of course, falling home prices exacerbate foreclosures for those who can't afford their mortgage payments, either because of a change in their ability to pay or because of an adjustable rate mortgage reset. In other words, I would term that either an income problem or a product problem. And it is these borrowers who are faced with the prospects of foreclosure even when they want to remain in their homes. And that is where our efforts are aimed. And we have a two-policy or two-pronged approach here that focuses on these two sources of rising foreclosures. First, a stimulus package to support the economy and create jobs so that there will be fewer who will suffer an income loss. And second, a very focused effort to help struggling homeowners who want to keep their homes. Now, just a few words about the stimulus package. We've done a lot of work with the IRS, and I think some people were surprised to hear that the IRS is able to do this. but beginning May 2nd, we will get payments out and we're going to get the payments out for really all filers, everyone who files by the 15th of April, get it out largely by the end of June, and it may go into the first week of July. But a big effort beginning with direct deposits very early in May. And so this will make a very real difference. It will add at least 500,000 jobs this year. It will add to GDP. It will add to growth when we need it. And secondly, we on this Hope Now Alliance, what we're doing is the industry is aggressively reaching out to those in need, and we're seeing some real results. I'd like to see more in terms of response, but before the effort was begun, 2 to 3% of the people who were approached actually responded. Now that's closer to 20%. And there's 20% of the people that can be helped. There's still 80% aren't responding, but it's a very big difference. And when you look at the fourth quarter of last year, we had twice the number of mortgage modifications that we had in the third quarter. And again, we have a big focus on subprime, and sometimes people ask me why we focus on subprime, and let me give you some quick statistics. Even in a good year, the period 2002 through 2005, there are roughly 650,000 foreclosures in the United States. So that would be an average year. Last year, we don't have all the numbers in, but I think it'll be something around 1.5 million foreclosures. And there are forecasts indicating that they'll be higher this year, maybe up to 2 million foreclosures this year. Now, when you look at the foreclosures, they're disproportionately concentrated in the subprime area. Of the 55 million mortgages in this country, 13% are subprime, and yet that 13% is going to have 50% of the foreclosures. And then if you look at the mortgages where there's the product problem, as I describe it, the adjustable rate, the so-called 228, the adjustable rate, or the ARM subprime mortgages, that's about 6.5% of the total, and that's got 40% of the foreclosures. So we've worked very hard on this group, and we put together this Hope Now Alliance, which has a program aimed at fast-tracking those homeowners that are able to make their initial payment. So they're able to make their initial payment, are not going to be able to afford their reset, and fast-tracking them into either a modification, which can be an interest rate freeze, or into a refinancing. And the objective there, and I believe it will be obtainable, the objective is if you're a homeowner, got a subprime mortgage that's going to reset, and you can afford the initial payment, and the initial payments, and you want to stay in your home and you're willing to talk to someone about it, then you should be able to stay in your home. You shouldn't be pushed into foreclosure. And that's the way that program should work. A number of the technical difficulties were worked out in early January, including the guidance we needed from the SEC, the accounting guidance. And so I look very forward to seeing the results for January soon. They will serve as a baseline for measuring the effectiveness of this effort going forward. And I've said to the industry, I'll be examining the results closely. And it's important for me and everyone else to see that everyone who signed up for this protocol is following through on their commitment to implement it. And I'm not going to look very kindly on free riders. So we're, again, working very hard in the mortgage area, watching it closely. Let me, before going to questions, hit a couple of areas quickly. Another very big headwind is the capital markets turmoil we see. And those in the industry, and I think all of you know that we saw a lot of volatility, a lot of turmoil beginning in August. There was a dry forest out there waiting for a match, and I guess the match or the fuse was subprime, but this has led to a repricing of risk. At the time, we said it's going to take a while to work through this because our economy is now more, and our capital markets are more integrated into the global markets, and because of the complexity of the product. And in my judgment, some of the complexity has been good. Innovation is a good thing, and innovation leads regulation in our capital markets. But I think most of us look at it, think that complexity had gone too far, and it's being punished right now in the markets as it probably should be. But we're working our way through. There's a good number of markets that aren't performing as they should. There's a great deal of risk aversion right now in the markets. Liquidity is at a premium, but we're working our way through it. I have great confidence in our markets. They always will work their way through something like this, and they are. And it's going to take a while longer for the excesses to be wrung out of the system. And as we've thought about this at Treasury, we thought about it with a two-pronged approach. First, and most importantly, we need to get through this period with as little impact as possible on the real economy. And then we're going to need a policy response. We're going to need to put some policies, some regulation in place carefully to reduce the likelihood of this happening again. Now, as we work our way through this period, the message I give, I talk every day. I talk with people in my former industry, talk with them in the U.S. and abroad. The message I give is if you've got losses, recognize them. And if you need capital or think you're going to need capital, raise it when it's available, and it's available today. And it's much better to raise capital than to be shrinking your balance sheet, taking away opportunities, and really hurting our economy by not lending, not making money available to those who need it. And then in terms of the policy response, I chair a group called the President's Working Group on Financial Markets, and we have Ben Bernanke of the Fed, and we have Chris Cox of the SEC and the CFTC, and we're working together there. And globally, we're working. At the G7, we have a group called the Financial Stability Forum, run by Mario Draghi, and we're working to formulate a response, and one that hopefully will be appropriate and won't go so far that it will make the situation worse. But we're going to need to deal with the mortgage origination issue in the U.S. We're going to have to deal with securitization and some of the issues surrounding securitization, and some of the issues surrounding the rating agencies and disclosure and valuation issues. And so there are things that are being worked on very hard right now. And then at Treasury, we have a project which maybe would only be interesting to someone who spent a lot of time in the markets, but we're working on a regulatory blueprint, because as we look at the regulatory structure in the U.S., and for that matter in most of the world, but we're focused on the U.S., it is a patchwork quilt. It's built up over a period of time. There are some gaping holes. There's some areas where there's a lot of inefficiency, and it really doesn't do justice to what we need with modern capital markets and a modern economy. So we are going to do work there. And lastly, I will say, because Bill had mentioned entitlements, when I came to Washington, there were some very major, important long-term issues that I thought were going to be difficult to get done. We needed to try, and my view was if we couldn't come up with solutions that could be enacted, we at Treasury wanted to at least help move the ball forward and do it in a way which wasn't partisan, which would make it easier for those that came after us to deal with these. And of course, one of them are the whole entitlements challenge. And if you look at our fiscal situation in the country right now, the short-term fiscal issue at the end of the year, our budget deficit was 1.2% of GDP. And both Republicans and Democrats had been surprised and pleasantly surprised at the extent to which revenues had been pouring into Treasury. And the deficit had been coming down despite the fact that we're funding a war and the hurricanes and so on. So the short-term fiscal issue wasn't the serious one. It's what we've got staring us in the face looking out a number of years with Medicare and Social Security. And my view is that the country will obviously solve this at some time. It has to. And the sooner we do it, the more flexibility we will have. This is a structural issue, and the longer we wait, the greater the price the next generation will pay. And the other issue that is something where we're putting out papers regularly at Treasury and having conversations, quiet conversations up on the Hill. And the other area where we've put out papers and doing some work has to do with corporate taxes. And we have gone in our country from being a country that in the 70s taxed our global corporations at a rate that was relatively high at a time when there was very little danger of companies not having their U.S. companies moving their headquarters elsewhere, and when there was less global competition. Then in the 80s, there was a major tax reform and a big reduction in corporate taxes in the U.S., and we went from being a high corporate taxpayer to a low corporate taxpayer. And then the rest of the world woke up to what was happening, and they have been reducing dramatically their taxes relative to ours and are continuing to do so. And even of more concern to me, they're reducing the form of their taxes. And as I look at taxes just in general, we need taxes, we need revenues. And so the right way to think about taxes is how big should taxes be as a percentage of our economy, as a percentage of GDP. And then whenever you come up with that level, the next question to ask is what form of tax will make us as competitive as possible? Which form of tax will give us the maximum growth, the most jobs, the most competitiveness? And the form of taxation, other countries aren't copying us anymore in terms of the form of taxation. So again, this is an area where we've tried not to politicize it. We've just put out reports and studies on different approaches that can be taken because this is a matter of competitiveness. So I started in July of 2006, and I remember we got together with a dinner with former Treasury secretaries, and at that time I said, gee, 2.5 years, and George Shultz said to me, you know, Hank, the days are long, but the years are short. And I now look at it, and I've got less than a year left, and I'm not wishing that it were 2 years or a year and a half, but I'm going to run right to the end and do my best, and then look forward to coming home to Chicago. But anyway, thank you very much, and I'll take your questions.
Thank you very much, Hank. As you know, the custom of the club is to have questions which have been prepared and presented by the Questions Committee for our guest speaker. The first one, let me just ask you, your view of the dollar. Much has been made recently about its slide, and I guess in a very general way, or as specifically as you may want, just your observations on the dollar and the weakness or the strength and how you see it over the next number of months.
Bill, thank you very much. You know, as those of you who follow Treasury and Treasury secretaries know that Treasury secretaries always religiously say that they believe in a strong dollar, and some, I think, who knows what they really think. I spent 32 years in capital markets, and in my heart and soul, I just know and believe that a strong dollar is in our nation's interest. And I explain to people that our economy, like any other, is going to have its ups and downs, but that I believe our economy is going to continue to grow this year, and that our long-term competitiveness is going to be reflected in the value of the dollar. And I leave it at that. So, next question.
What are the lessons learned? You spent much time speaking of the subprime debacle. What are the lessons learned by the administration of this debacle, and what should or can be done to ensure that similar issues do not reoccur in the future?
Bill, I will make some general comments now because I expect to sometime in the next couple of months, and I don't want to. I don't think this is the time or place to preview those because we're working on this, and we're working in the president's working group on capital markets. But I would say that a couple things I will say. First of all, remember. Well, I'll start off more generally. When in July of 2006, when I had the first meeting with the president where I talked about the capital markets, at that time I explained that it was 2006 and we'd had the last turmoil in the financial markets 8 years earlier, and that's about as long as you ever go, and that there was you could point to a number of things that could be interpreted as excesses, dry forest out there, and that as we got together and did our planning, there was a lot of contingency planning, and people tended to say, "Now, what will the problem be?" And everyone wanted to focus on the hedge funds. It'll be something to do with the hedge funds. And at that time, one thing I brought to the thought process I brought was it's pointless to try to figure out what would cause the problem because people never do. That they didn't see the Russian default coming. They didn't see the Asian crisis coming. I said, whatever it is, when it comes, it'll seem obvious, but beforehand, it may not seem obvious. So what we need to do is we really need to get prepared. Now, you now can look at this, and a couple things come to mind. First of all, we were all focused on hedge funds, private pools of capital, coming up with best practices, and really looking at the relationship between the regulated entities, the banks and the prime brokers in these private pools. Is there enough margin, enough equity, all of those questions. And of course, no one had, and regulators didn't see that the SIVs and the off-balance sheet conduits that the regulated financial entities had. And so that's again, what was a surprise. And when you look at that, some of that was driven by the capital rules, by Basel, and then again, you could go back to the S&L crisis, and there was an issue there in terms of financing long-term real estate assets short, and again, a similar issue. There's some real obviously holes in the way we've regulated the mortgage industry. It's a patchwork quilt when we look at our regulatory system, and so there have been issues that have come to light with regard to the rating agencies. They have a long history of rating corporate credits, municipal credits, but these structured products, very, very complex products, maybe overly complex, and then investors too much on ratings as opposed to doing their own work, and the rating agencies look at credit as opposed to liquidity. I mean, there are just a lot of issues, but we're working our way through them, and I think and then the whole securitization process raises a lot of questions. But what I had said when I run Goldman Sachs and people came to me with a problem, I said, I always want to hear the problem. Please tell me what the problem is, but you'll really be a hero if you come up with a solution. You know, it's a lot easier, and trust me, as I'm finding on these things, it's a lot easier to come up with a problem than come up with a solution. And there are a few silver bullets, and people that come up with silver bullets may come up with something that's going to make it worse rather than better. So we're working our way through this, and there will be a policy response.
Sovereign wealth funds, mostly from emerging markets, emerging economies, have been a major new source of capital for financial institutions in the U.S. What sort of concerns do you have about these investments in U.S. companies? And do you foresee a possible political backlash similar to the one that we saw by the attempts of Dubai Port World to acquire operations in the U.S.?
Well, Bill, thank you. Again, a very timely question. I'm going to go back and say that there's real protectionist sentiment in this country right now. There just is. And it's of great concern to me, but the average American out there doesn't understand the benefits of trade because the dislocations are obvious, and often the dislocations have nothing to do with trade. They have to do with technology and automation, and no one says, well, I want to turn back automation or technology. They turn back, I want to shut off the internet, but globalization is of great concern, and we've always been open to investment in this country, and we've benefited from investment. That's the ultimate vote of confidence anyone can pay to our economy, is make a direct foreign investment. But the American people have always been suspicious for as long as I remember foreign investment. I remember in the 80s when the Japanese were buying golf courses, and I remember talking to one person I know very well when the Japanese bought the Rockefeller Center, and they just were, this person was very upset. And you see, for those of you who know me, I've still got that silver tongue, you know. But in any event, and I said to my mom, the Japanese can't put the Rockefeller Center on an aircraft carrier and take them back to Japan. You know, we've still got the Rockefeller Center and we've got their money. But there is a concern, and sovereign wealth funds have been investing in this country for a long time. Now, there is, and I think rightfully so today, more scrutiny because we have capital markets that are free and open, and they're driven by investors that make investments that are commercially driven and where there's an economic rationale. And everything we see is that's what's driving sovereign wealth funds who have been investing in this country for many years. They are much bigger in absolute terms, but as a percentage of global wealth, they're not much bigger. The projections are they're going to continue to grow very fast. And so at Treasury, what we're doing is, first of all, we welcome these investments, but we're spending a fair amount of time getting together with sovereign wealth funds from some of the newer ones, China and Russia and various places in the Middle East, as well as many that have been here for many, many years. We had a breakfast at Treasury where there were 27 of them there, and again, talking about their objectives, their motivations, and we are encouraging them to work with the IMF and others to develop a set of best practices so that they can make the recipients of their investments more comfortable. And then we're working with OECD countries to come up with some standards there so that they won't use the fact that someone is a sovereign wealth fund as an excuse to give in to protectionist sentiment. So again, there's a lot of focus on this right now, but my position is we welcome investment in this country.
You made the comment about, in the response to the last question about protectionism, and there are three, I believe there are three trade agreements that the president has negotiated that are to be put forward, Colombia, Panama, and Korea. And maybe you could give us a quick update of how you see them moving forward if they can be moved successfully this year.
Well, Bill, thank you. The focus, the first one that was moved forward and was signed into law was with Peru, and that's behind us. Colombia is next in line, and this is very important. It's very important to the U.S. in terms of the economic benefits to our country, and it's even more important in terms of the national security benefits. We have a strong ally in Colombia, President Uribe, who's very impressive and has had huge challenges, and dealing with violence and dealing with narcotics trafficking and so on. And I don't think anybody that looks at that situation doesn't see real progress, real improvement, and it's quite important. He's a key ally, and as we know, there are some populist leaders in the region who are not great friends, and no one wants to play into their hands. And so this is something that the president is very determined to get done, and we're working quite hard to get this done, and get this done as soon as possible. And then, of course, Korea is next, and Korea is a much bigger FTA economically, and it could have a significant impact to our economy, and a positive impact. And again, I think it's important as we look at trading relationships, and I spend a lot of time with China and managing that relationship from an economic standpoint. And again, I find it paradoxical that some of the people that are concerned about that trading relationship with China, which I think, I'm fighting to open up markets there and create more opportunity, but I believe we benefit from that, and it's important that some of the people that are most concerned about that are also concerned about us moving forward and developing some other strong and stronger relationships in the region. But anyway, that's, I think, also strategically important and economically important, the FTA, and then next would be Panama.
Some economists and politicians have suggested that the $150 billion economic stimulus package should not be used to purchase consumer goods from China or other emerging markets, but rather should be used to build infrastructure in the U.S. and creating U.S. jobs. Why did the administration choose a cash rebate program over a longer-term infrastructure investment program?
Bill, very good question. There are a good number of longer-term policy priorities that well-meaning people on both sides of the aisle have, and are fundamentally more important and would be more important on the longer-term basis than the stimulus package. The stimulus package is aimed at one thing and one thing only, which is to provide support quickly to our economy this year. So the idea is it's temporary, and as far as we're concerned, that there's nothing that will make a bigger difference quickly than putting checks in the hands of people that are going to spend the money. And I'd heard all the stories about infrastructure and people arguing that infrastructure money gets spent quickly. I'll tell you, it doesn't. We studied it, we looked at it. There's all kinds of apocryphal stories about these projects that are all approved and the money will be spent right away. We couldn't find them, and that's not to say they're not good infrastructure projects. So this was getting it done right away. And the other thing I would say to you, for those who say we're just buying goods from China, our imports from China, first of all, our imports are about 19% of GDP, and China is some fraction of that. So when the numbers I've come up with, which are adding something in the neighborhood of 0.7% to GDP 500,000 to 600,000 jobs this year, are looking at all of those and understanding the impacts of our imports. So again, there is no silver bullet. There is no perfect policy. We got criticized by some people for being too slow. Many economists said to me, how can you be moving with a stimulus package while we're still growing? You know, you're supposed to do this when you're in recession. You're saying you don't think you're going in recession. You think you're going to continue to grow. We said the risks are to the downside, and we want to move quickly. And we will be having money get into our economy as early as the beginning of May when it can make a real difference. And I don't think any infrastructure program could have done that.
You've spent a lot of time when you're in the private sector, and also since you've been Secretary of the Treasury, on issues in China. Your strategic initiative with the leadership on behalf of the economic team for this administration. Two things. One, your view on China floating its currency, and second of all, how do you see the overall relationship with China as a result of the intense efforts you've put into it over the last 2 years?
Bill, thank you. I'll do the second part of that question first, and then get to the currency. The U.S.-China relationship is a complex one, multidimensional, and very important. It's as important as any economic relationship or any overall relationship we have in the world, and it's important that we get it right. And to me, the value of the strategic economic dialogue is that it elevates the economic relationship to the point where we have more leverage, and it elevates it to the point where we can speak with one voice. When I came to Washington, we had many different economic programs and discussions with China, and the idea of being able to prioritize and be able to get to the top level and be able to get to multiple leaders of China rather than being stovepiped is made a difference. And I think what we've been able to do with this is work on the most important, fundamental, longer-term issues with China while we deal with the most difficult short-term issues and keep the relationship on an even keel. And I'll give you an example. And we're making, what I like to make more progress, yes, but we're making progress that we wouldn't make if we didn't have this dialogue. And I'll give you, I will give you two examples. The latest meeting we had in Beijing, the huge issue at that time was import safety, product safety, the integrity of trade. And we didn't have a system with China or any place else in the world that we had in place that you could just ramp up. It took a lot of creativity. Mike Levitt, who runs HHS, did a stupendous job, but we are able to elevate this issue and deal with it, and I think really break some important new ground. It's not solved, but break some very important new ground and deal with. We're able to deal with when we had the countervailing duties, some of the actions that your alma mater, Commerce, took, and others in the trade area. We're able to keep the relationship on an even keel, and then we're able to deal with long-term issues. I happen to think one of the most important long-term issues is global warming, is energy security, energy efficiency, the environmental issues, and we're going to get nowhere in solving this if China isn't part of it. No matter what we do, if China isn't part of it, and we've had really a very, very good discussion with them and made great progress, beginning with imports. I've made the case when we talk with developing countries, they will often say, well, you all polluted when you were going through your development phase, and I say, yes, we did, but there are now important new technologies that are available to you that weren't available to us. You managed to use them when you look at telecommunications and other things, and there's something perverse when you don't use them and you charge a tariff on environmental goods and services. That's an economic issue and it's a moral issue. And I think we're making real progress with China on that. And I was quite pleased that in December, the two sides agreed to work and put together a 10-year plan, a 10-year program to deal with energy security, the environment, and global warming, which we're putting in place and we'll be able to roll out when we have the SED in the U.S. in June. So again, now on currency, we have sort of a perverse situation to the extent that China is in a stage of development where it is not ready to float the currency yet. I don't think any economist thinks they're ready to float the currency, but we all think they should move quicker, and they have been, and I'll get to that in a minute, to appreciate the currency so it reflects economic reality. And so the rest of the world, for all practical purposes, the other major nations, many nations don't have a market-determined currency, but the major economic powers do. And so it's an unnatural act for China to be as integrated as they are into the global economy in terms of the trade in goods and services and not in currency. And so we've all been working on this. They have been appreciating the currency much more quickly recently. And I think they recognize that it's in their interest because, again, it's a bit of an unnatural act to have an economy as big and complex and as integrated into the global economy as they are, and still using a combination of market means and administrative means to run the economy. And if they're going to control inflation, it's difficult to do that without using monetary policy. And I've always felt that those who worry about China overtaking us because they extrapolate the fact that China is growing very quickly and just assume it's going to go on forever to our disadvantage are worried about the wrong thing. They should be worried about China hitting some bumps in the road and not doing as well, and then we'd feel the effect because, frankly, as China does well economically, that benefits all of us in our country, and when we do well, it benefits them. And I know that's not a popular sentiment, but it happens to be true.
Given your well-established concerns for the environment, can you please share your views on carbon credits and other potential methods of reducing pollutants?
Well, first of all, I would say that we are not going to solve this problem. And I'll get to that in a minute. We're not going to solve the problem unless we get the major developed countries, the major economies, and developing countries to all come to an agreement in terms of setting some kind of targets, which is something the President has been pressing very hard for, and I think there's progress being made. There's also a huge need to get clean technologies developed that can be used in the power sector, particularly coal. And one of the things that I'm working on very hard right now is working to put together a clean technology fund that will be used to pay for the difference between the technologies that are being used in the developing countries and the cleanest technologies, and to help also catalyze the private sector. And we have Japan and the UK signing on, and we're spending a lot of time, and that's one thing I'd like to get done before I leave. And it's something I'm working very hard on. Now, I believe very much in markets and having markets work. I'm not a big proponent of offsets. I'm not a big proponent of running and paying developing countries to pollute. Okay, I believe in incentives and market-based incentives. When we look at our country, for instance, and look at the work that's been done on acid rain, and what you've seen right here on the climate exchange in Chicago with Richard Sadner, trading SO2 and NOx, it can make a big difference. And as a matter of fact, we spent a fair amount of time with the Chinese, working with them and helping them develop trading and market mechanisms. So I'm a big believer in that, and I think, again, that each country is going to need their own strategies, and I support market mechanisms.
As our national economy, and surely our Midwest economy, is moved to a more of a service economy, what implications does that have on the nation's economic growth as we go forward?
Bill, I'm going to go a little bit longer here, because amazing the people I run into, and this won't be the feeling of this group as I look around, but there are people that believe the only good jobs are manufacturing jobs, and believe that if you don't have a manufacturing job, you're either a burger flipper or you're producing no value. And as you know, manufacturing is very important, but if you go back to 1950, we had 15 million manufacturing jobs in this country, and that was 30% of the workforce. Today, we have 15 million manufacturing jobs. That's 10% of the workforce. Those manufacturing jobs in the U.S. have 7 times the output they did in 1950. Productivity has increased markedly. And guess who's the largest manufacturer in the world? The United States of America. We are 2.5 times bigger than China as a manufacturer. So, but fortunately, as we have evolved, we have developed many good jobs, and there are great service jobs throughout this country. And many sectors of the service industry where they're add to the productivity and the growth and the strength of our nation. But I think the key as we go forward here, and it's going to be critical for our country, and it's going to be critical for every developed country, to come up with the proper job training, skill training program in the future to make sure that our workers have the skills they need to be successful in today's world.
What have been some of the biggest differences between working in the public sector and the private sector?
Well, there are a lot of differences, but I'm going to start with the similarities, because I would say that you can't get much done in the private sector, and you clearly can't get much done in the public sector unless you work well with others. You know, you have to be really, really brilliant if you can't, to make a contribution, if you can't work with others. And so having people skills, being able to listen, being able to see the other person's perspective, I think is very important. The other thing I will say to you, which I think shocks people, but when I get together with my private sector friends, they say, oh, you must, you know, it just must be terrible working with all those idiots, and they disparage members of Congress and so on. And I say, you know, it's there maybe aren't some members of Congress might not be great CEOs, but I got to tell you, a lot of CEOs wouldn't be good members of Congress, because senators and congressmen, I'll tell you, they work hard. They work hard all week, then they fly home in their district and get to work all weekend. And I have really been impressed with the dedication of people I've seen in Washington. I don't like the partisanship, but there are a lot of hardworking, very dedicated people. I think the differences are that it's the public scrutiny and a short-term approach often, and a divisiveness, because you know, when you look at problems, there are some problems that are analytically very difficult. You just take a look at health care, Medicare, and Medicaid. Analytically difficult than politically difficult. Social Security is analytically simple and politically difficult. So it can be frustrating working in the public sector, but frankly, I find more similarities than differences.
Our last question. As Secretary of the Treasury and such an integral part of an administration, you get the opportunity to, in a very up-close way, to see the skills of your CEO, our nation's CEO, the President of the United States. Could you tell us and share with us some of your observations about the President, his management style, and how he works with the cabinet and works with his staff?
Okay, Bill, thank you. And let me say, first of all, the President comes to play every day, okay? He is focused, and he's always focused. He's bright. He wants to hear both sides of an issue. And you and I were talking earlier. I was saying to Bill that he was asking me about life in Washington, and I was saying I get to the office early. I work till about 7. I go home and I'm asleep at 9. He asked if I'd seen various people. I said I don't do a lot of socializing. He said you must get along well with the President, because he runs, unlike Bill's boss, meetings start on time. You know, they end on time, and we don't stay up all night, but we start early. And I can say to you, one of the real pleasures I've had is working with George Bush. Some of you, I look around here and I see some people from my former industry, and a lot of them are client people. And I spent 32 years, and much of it, although I spent 8 of those years as a CEO and a few more years as a chief operating officer, I always worked with clients, and I worked with CEOs, and I advised CEOs, and I was used to doing that. And so I have found it, and I recognize that as a banker, it's your job to work and figure out how to work with the principal. And so I came to Washington knowing that no matter what we agreed to beforehand, that it was incumbent upon me to develop a relationship and a relationship with the President. And I find I can be very candid, and it's a great relationship and a real pleasure for me.
Mr. Secretary, we, on behalf of the club, we truly appreciate your being with us this evening. Our meeting is adjourned. You know, I'll give you a call tomorrow. If I got no more.